I'm currently staring at a $1,500 lien notice on my kitchen table while my 10-year-old son, Toby, happily tapes cardboard afterburners to his wheelchair in the garage. He thinks he's becoming Batman. The new HOA president, a woman named Karen who sees a demon behind every pumpkin, thinks he's a pagan liability. She's already tried to frame me with a driveway full of rotting gourds and just ordered an emergency paving crew to trap us in our driveway on Halloween night. But she doesn't know about the hidden camera in my mailbox or the underground meeting currently happening in my basement. My name is David Nixon, and I'm on the verge of losing my house because I refuse to let a neighborhood tyrant steal the one night of the year my son feels like a superhero. If you've ever dealt with a Karen who uses bylaws like a holy crusade, you'll want to see how this ends. From secret prayer circles to a high-stakes clubhouse showdown, this is the story of how Willow Creek fought back against the ultimate gatekeeper to prove that some traditions are worth every penny of a non-compliant fine. Today's story is from David, a single father whose life revolves around making the world accessible and magical for his son, Toby. For David, the fight against a tyrannical HOA isn't about property lines or paint swatches. It's about protecting the one night a year where Toby's wheelchair transforms from a limitation into a superpower. Before we dive in, please do me a favor and smash that like button now and comment below on what you would have done if you were in David's situation. The humid air of a late September evening hung heavy over Willow Creek, but the atmosphere inside the community clubhouse felt 10 degrees colder. I sat in the back row, my hands still smelling faintly of the motor oil from the wheelchair lift I'd been greasing earlier. Beside me, Toby was tapping a restless, rhythmic beat on his armrest, his eyes fixed on the empty wooden podium at the front of the room. "Is it time, Dad?" he whispered, his voice thick with the kind of pure, unadulterated excitement he'd been nursing since the first yellow leaf hit the pavement in August. "Is Mr. Henderson going to talk about the haunted trail yet?" I squeezed his shoulder, a lump forming in my throat that I couldn't quite swallow. "Not tonight, Tobes. Remember? Mr. Henderson," he moved on. "We're picking someone new today." Mr. Henderson hadn't just been the HOA president. He'd been the soul of our street. He was the guy who bought the extra-large king-size bars for the kids with allergies and spent 3 days every October turning the cul-de-sac into a fog-drenched pirate shipwreck. He understood that a neighborhood wasn't just a collection of property values. It was a place where kids got to be heroes for a night. But 3 months ago, his heart had finally given out, and Willow Creek had felt like a ship without a captain ever since. "All right, everyone, let's settle down. We have a lot of business to attend to." The voice cut through the pre-meeting chatter like a paper cut. Sharp, nasal, and entirely devoid of warmth. Karen stepped to the front with a stiff-backed posture that suggested she'd spent her afternoon ironing her soul. She'd lived in Willow Creek for maybe 2 years, and in that time, she'd mostly been known for two things: her impeccably manicured and suspiciously sterile lawn, and her habit of measuring the height of people's hedges with a literal yardstick. "As you all know," Karen continued, her eyes scanning the room like a hawk looking for a field mouse, "we have one opening for board president. Due to the unfortunate lack of volunteers, and per the bylaws of this association, I am stepping forward to fill the vacancy." A low, uncomfortable murmur rippled through the room. I looked around. Most of my neighbors, tired parents, overworked commuters, retirees who just wanted to be left alone, were staring at their laps. Nobody wanted the paperwork, the disputes over trash cans, or the late-night calls about barking dogs. They were looking for a path of least resistance. "Since there are no other nominees," Karen said, her lips curling into a thin line that wasn't quite a smile, "I suppose the position is mine by default, effective immediately." She didn't bang a gavel, but the way she gripped the edges of the podium felt just as final. Her gaze swept over the crowd and landed directly on us. Or rather, she looked at Toby's chair. I saw a brief, unmistakable flash of distaste flicker across her face, a look that said Toby's presence was an irregularity in her perfect landscape. She smoothed it over instantly with a mask of suburban concern. "I've spent the last few weeks reviewing our community's traditions," she said, putting a heavy, mocking emphasis on the word. "And I think you'll find that under my leadership, Willow Creek is going to become a place of order, a place of decency. We've let things slide for too long. We've allowed this neighborhood to look chaotic, cluttered. Toby leaned toward me, his brow furrowed in confusion. Dad, she didn't mention the pumpkins. Mr. Henderson always starts with the pumpkins. Not yet, buddy, I murmured, but a cold knot was tightening in my stomach. As Karen began listing her new beautification standards, each one sounding more like a restriction than an improvement, she kept glancing back at our row. It wasn't the look of a neighbor. It was the look of a gardener spotting a weed she intended to pull. The changing of the guard had happened, and as I wheeled Toby out into the fading twilight, I realized the battle for his favorite day of the year hadn't just begun. It was already being declared a nuisance by the woman now holding the keys to the kingdom. The transition from September to October usually felt like a slow burn fuse in our house, but this year, Toby had the matches ready on day one. By 7 a.m. on October 1st, the kitchen table was buried under a mountain of cardboard silver spray paint and a tangled mess of purple LED strips. Dad, look, if we mount the thrusters here, Toby said, pointing a shaky but determined finger at a sketch of his wheelchair. The Batmobile won't just roll. It'll look like it's hovering. I grabbed a lukewarm coffee, leaning over his shoulder. This was our ritual. Toby's cerebral palsy meant that most days were a battle with his own muscles, a series of frustrations where his body wouldn't do what his brain commanded. But Halloween? On Halloween, the wheelchair wasn't a limitation. It was a chassis. He wasn't a kid who needed help. He was a hero who saved the city. Hovering is good, Tobes, but we need to make sure the afterburners don't catch on the spokes, I teased, ruffling his hair. I already thought of that, he shot back with a grin that could light up the entire block. Safety first, Batman second. The morning was perfect until I stepped out to get the mail. The air was crisp, smelling of wood smoke and dried leaves, the exact scent of my own childhood Octobers. I started walking down the driveway, but my pace faltered when I saw a flash of beige move behind the hedges across the street. Karen. She was standing on her porch, clutching a clipboard to her chest like a shield. She wasn't just getting her mail. She was staring, not at me, but at the single, modest string of orange fairy lights I'd draped over the garage door the night before. I waved, a reflex of old-school neighborhood politeness, but she didn't wave back. She looked down at her clipboard, scribbled something with a flourish, and retreated into her house like a hermit crab pulling into its shell. 10 minutes later, the first official notice hit my inbox. Subject: Violation of Article 4, Section 3, Aesthetic Uniformity. I clicked it open, my heart sinking. It wasn't about the lights. It was a formal citation regarding the temporary plywood structure in my garage. She had been peeking through the cracked garage door while Toby and I were working on the Batmobile. Please be advised, the email read, that all hobbyist construction must be shielded from public view. Willow Creek aims to maintain a professional, high-end atmosphere. Furthermore, please note that the association is currently reviewing the appropriateness of external displays for the upcoming month. We ask that all residents refrain from cluttering the streetscape with non-sanctioned materials. Non-sanctioned materials, I muttered, gripping the edge of my desk. She meant the cardboard. She meant Toby's joy. I looked back at the kitchen. Toby was struggling to hold a pair of safety scissors, his tongue poked out in concentration as he tried to cut a batwing shape out of a refrigerator box. He looked so small against the backdrop of the massive project, but his spirit was 10 feet tall. Hey, Dad, Toby called out. Do you think the new lady, Karen, likes Batman? Maybe we should make her a mask so she can join the Justice League. I swallowed the bitter taste in my mouth and forced a smile. I think Karen's more of a villain type, Tobes. But don't worry, the Cape Crusader always finds a way. I walked over and sat down beside him, picking up the scissors. I knew then that the review she mentioned in the email wasn't a suggestion. It was a threat. Karen wasn't just trying to clean up the neighborhood. She was trying to sanitize the fun right out of it. And as I looked at the determined set of my son's jaw, I knew I wasn't going to let her win without a hell of a fight. The crisp October air usually felt like an invitation, but by Tuesday morning, it felt like a surveillance net. Every time I stepped onto the porch to toss a bag of trash or check the mail, I could feel Karen's gaze. She didn't even try to hide it anymore. She'd stand in her upstairs window, the slat of the Venetian blinds held down by one bony finger, watching the non-conforming activities of 124 Oak Court. I was helping Toby into the van for his physical therapy session when I saw the neon orange slip of paper fluttering under my windshield wiper. My stomach did a slow, sickening roll. Is that a flyer for the carnival, Dad? Toby asked, his eyes bright with hope. Something like that, buddy, I lied, tucking the paper into my pocket before he could see the bold black lettering. Official notice of non-compliance. After I dropped him off at the clinic, I pulled into a parking lot and smoothed the paper out on the dashboard. It wasn't about the cardboard in the garage this time. It was a direct hit. Violation. Article 7, Section 2. External structures and aesthetics. Item, unapproved accessibility ramp. My hand started to shake. The ramp had been there for 3 years. Mr. Henderson had personally helped me bolt the treated timber to the porch the week we brought Toby home from his major hip surgery. It was a lifeline. Without it, Toby was a prisoner in his own house. The board notes, the citation read in Karen's clinical detached prose, that the current wood stain of the ramp at 124 Oak Court deviates from the weathered oak palette mandated for all porch attachments. Please be advised that the fine for non-matching structural aesthetics is $50 per day, retroactive to the date of the new board's inauguration. Retroactive. That was over $700. I didn't go home. I drove straight to Karen's house. I didn't care if I looked like the angry neighbor she was clearly trying to cast me as. I marched up her pristine aggregate walkway, which was, I noted bitterly, exactly the right shade of desert sand, and hammered on her door. She opened it slowly, wearing a floral apron and holding a wooden spoon, the picture of domestic innocence. "Oh, David, you look distressed. Is everything all right with the boy?" "You know damn well why I'm here, Karen," I said, holding up the orange slip. "This ramp has been here for 3 years. It's an ADA-compliant necessity. You can't find me for the shade of the wood stain." Karen's expression didn't change, but her eyes went cold. "Actually, David, the Americans with Disabilities Act governs public spaces. This is a private homeowners association. We have a contract. A contract you signed when you moved in to maintain the visual harmony of the street." "Harmony?" I stepped closer, my voice dropping an octave. "Toby uses that ramp to get to school, to get to the doctor. You're using it as a weapon because I didn't vote for your harvest brunch nonsense at the meeting." Karen let out a soft, theatrical sigh and leaned against the doorframe. "It's about standards, David. If I let you have a mismatched ramp, then the Millers will want a mismatched fence, and before you know it, we're living in a shantytown. I'm just trying to protect your property value. Truly." "You're trying to bully us," I snapped. "I'm following the bylaws," she countered, her voice rising just enough for the neighbor walking his dog to hear. "I'm sorry you find the rules so burdensome, but perhaps you should have considered the community's aesthetic before installing such a prominent fixture." She started to close the door, but then she paused, a saccharine smile stretching across her face. "And David, I noticed those orange lights are still up on your garage. The new autumn initiative guidelines go out tomorrow. I'd suggest you read them carefully. We wouldn't want to add unauthorized electrical hazards to your bill, would we?" The door clicked shut with a finality that echoed in my chest. As I walked back to my van, I looked at the ramp on my house, the sturdy, safe, mismatched wood that carried my son's world. Karen wasn't just after the holiday. She was trying to prove that anything that didn't fit her narrow definition of perfect didn't belong in Willow Creek, and she was willing to bankrupt me to prove her point. The following Thursday, the neighborhood felt different. It wasn't just the dropping temperature. It was the atmosphere of suspicion Karen had managed to cultivate in less than a week. Every time I drove past a neighbor's house, I saw them adjusting their curtains or quickly looking away. Karen was busy, and she wasn't just sending emails anymore. She was holding informational teas. The emergency HOA meeting was called for 7 p.m. The subject on the digital notice was vague: community wellness and liability mitigation. "Can I come, Dad?" Toby asked as I helped him finish his homework. "Maybe they're voting on the costume parade route." I looked at his hopeful face and felt a pang of guilt. "Not tonight, buddy. It's mostly boring grown-up talk about insurance and grass heights. Stay here with Mrs. Gable, okay? We'll work on the Batmobile's cape when I get back." The clubhouse was packed. Karen sat at the front, flanked by 2 board members who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else: a retired accountant named Mel and a young guy named Chris who looked terrified of his own shadow. Karen, however, looked radiant. She wore a power suit the color of a stormy sky and had a stack of professionally printed brochures in front of her. "Thank you all for coming," Karen began. her voice amplified by a small portable PA system she'd clearly bought for the occasion. As your president, my primary duty is the safety and well-being of our families. Recently, I've been consulted by experts regarding the rising liabilities of certain seasonal activities. She clicked a remote, and a projector hummed to life. A slide appeared on the wall. Autumn safety, protecting our children and our assets. We all love the spirit of the season, Karen lied, her smile as thin as a razor blade. But we have to face the facts. Traditional door-to-door solicitation, what some call trick-or-treating, presents a litany of risks. Trip hazards from unlit walkways, choking hazards from uninspected candies, and of course, the dark element that such events tend to attract from outside the gates. I felt a ripple of unease in the room. She was playing on every parent's subconscious fear, wrapping her personal distaste for the holiday in the indestructible armor of safety. Therefore, she continued, the board is introducing the Quiet and Safe Autumn Initiative. Instead of the chaotic, unsupervised roaming of our streets on October 31st, Willow Creek will host a harvest brunch on Sunday morning. Organic apple slices, a craft station for leaf pressing, and a strictly enforced 6 p.m. curfew for the entire weekend. A curfew? The voice came from the back. It was Mike Miller, a guy who usually didn't care about anything unless it involved his grill. You're saying my kids can't go outside after 6? On a Saturday? Karen tilted her head, the picture of motherly patience. It's for their protection, Michael. We simply cannot guarantee the safety of the sidewalks with the excessive clutter some residents have insisted on installing. She looked directly at me. The slide changed. It was a photo of my house, specifically a close-up of Toby's ramp. When we have non-conforming structures and interactive garage displays, she said, her voice dropping to a theatrical whisper, we create an environment of negligence. If a child were to trip on a mismatched plank or be frightened by a mechanical display, the entire HOA could be sued. We wouldn't want anything unsafe for children with special needs, would we, David? The room went silent. She had framed my son's accessibility and his joy as a legal threat to the entire neighborhood. I stood up, my chair scraping harshly against the linoleum. That ramp is for my son's life, Karen, I said, my voice shaking with a mix of rage and disbelief. And those mechanical displays are a cardboard Batmobile he's been dreaming about for 6 months. You're not worried about safety. You're worried about control. Karen didn't blink. She just sighed, a sound of weary disappointment. David, I understand you're emotional. It's hard to see the bigger picture when you're so focused on your own specific situation. But the board must think of the collective. The harvest brunch is safer, cleaner, and frankly, more dignified than the pagan displays we've seen in the past. She caught herself on the word pagan, her eyes widening for a fraction of a second before she smoothed it over. But the slip was enough. I saw a few neighbors exchange looks. It wasn't about insurance. It was a crusade. The motion for the harvest brunch and the October 31st curfew is open for a preliminary vote, Karen announced, ignoring me entirely. Mel and Chris, looking like they were under a spell, or perhaps just afraid of being the next ones on Karen's violation list, raised their hands. Motion carries, Karen said, her eyes gleaming with triumph. Willow Creek will have a quiet, safe, and orderly October. Meeting adjourned. I walked out into the cool night, my head spinning. She hadn't just banned Halloween. She'd turned my son into a liability. As I reached my driveway, I saw the orange lights on the garage. I didn't take them down. I went inside, grabbed a roll of duct tape, and went back to work on the Batmobile. If Karen wanted a villain for her story, I was happy to play the part. I woke up on Saturday morning to the sound of a camera shutter, that sharp, digital click-clack that usually signifies a tourist taking a photo, not a neighbor standing on your property. When I pulled back the curtains, I saw Karen. She was dressed in a pristine white tracksuit, clutching her DSLR camera like a weapon. She was standing at the edge of my driveway, framing a shot of my front porch. But it wasn't the ramp she was focusing on this time. What the hell? I muttered, shoving my feet into my boots. I stepped outside, the morning air biting at my lungs. The smell hit me before I even reached the bottom of the ramp. It was the thick, cloying scent of rot. There, piled high against my garage door and scattered across the lawn, were dozens of smashed, slime-filled pumpkins. They were gray with mold, crawling with fruit flies, and leaking a dark, vinegary liquid onto the concrete. David, good morning, Karen chirped, not lowering the camera. I was just doing my morning rounds. I must say, I'm disappointed. I knew you were passionate about your hobby, but this is a legitimate biohazard. I didn't put these here, Karen, I said, my voice low. I don't even own a pumpkin yet. Toby and I were going to the patch this afternoon. Karen made a tisk sound, tapping the screen of her camera. The evidence suggests otherwise. It looks like someone tried to create a ghoulish display and simply lacked the basic hygiene to maintain it. Or perhaps, she tilted her head, her eyes gleaming with a terrifying faux pity. The stress of your situation is making it hard to keep up with basic home maintenance. My situation is fine. This is a setup. A setup? She laughed, a brittle, hollow sound. David, who would go through the trouble of hauling 3 dozen rotting gourds onto your lawn in the middle of the night? That's quite a conspiracy theory. However, the board and the health department won't see it as a theory. They'll see a neglected property attracting vermin. By noon, the photo was live on the Willow Creek Residents Facebook group. Karen had captioned it, "A heartbreaking example of why we need the Quiet and Safe Autumn Initiative. We must support our neighbors who are struggling, but we cannot allow our community's health to be compromised by traditional debris." The comments section was a battlefield. Some people defended me, but others, the ones who lived 3 streets over and only saw the photo, started chiming in. Is that the house with the wood ramp? I heard they're having trouble keeping up. Gross. My kids walk past there to get to the bus stop. Karen is right. We need standards. I spent 4 hours scrubbing the driveway with bleach, my back aching and my anger simmering just below the surface. Toby watched from the window, his face pressed against the glass. His excitement for our trip to the pumpkin patch completely evaporated. Are we still going, Dad? He asked when I finally came inside, exhausted. To get the great pumpkin? Not today, Tobes, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I have to deal with some paperwork. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the screen of my laptop. Karen was smart. She wasn't just attacking my wallet with fines anymore. She was attacking my reputation. She wanted the neighborhood to see me as a burden, someone whose special circumstances were a drain on the collective. If she could make me the villain, no one would listen when I tried to tell them the truth about her initiative. But as I looked at the bleach-reddened skin on my hands, I realized something. Karen had been so busy staging the crime scene that she hadn't noticed my new doorbell camera. It was small, tucked under the eaves, and it had a perfect view of the driveway. I pulled up the footage from 3:15 a.m. The video was grainy, but the silhouette was unmistakable. A beige SUV, the exact model Karen drove, had backed into my driveway. A figure in a dark hoodie had spent 20 minutes unloading heavy bags from the trunk, dumping the rotting contents right where I'd find them. I leaned back in my chair, a cold smile finally touching my lips. Karen wanted to play detective, but she'd forgotten the first rule of a setup: don't leave a trail. I didn't post the video. Not yet. I needed more. If I went to the board now, she'd find a way to wiggle out of it, claim she was cleaning up someone else's mess and just happened to drop it on my lawn. No, I needed to see her true face. I needed to see what she was really hiding behind that quiet and safe mask. The footage of Karen dumping the pumpkins burned a hole in my hard drive. Every time I looked at her, waving at neighbors with that plastic rehearsed smile, I felt the weight of the file. But I knew one grainy clip of illegal dumping wouldn't be enough to dismantle the empire of safety she'd built. I needed to know why she was doing this. What was the end game? The answer came on a Tuesday night, 2 weeks before Halloween. Toby was fast asleep, dreaming of jet thrusters and graphite armor. I was out on the porch, nursing a cold coffee and trying to figure out how to pay the latest aesthetic deviation fine without dipping into Toby's physical therapy fund. A flash of movement caught my eye. Across the street, 3 cars I didn't recognize pulled into Karen's driveway. They weren't neighbors. They had out-of-county plates and bumper stickers with slogans like "Return to Tradition" and "Guardians of the Gate." I didn't think. I just moved. I slipped on a dark hoodie, grabbed my phone, and crossed the street, staying in the long shadows of the oak trees. Karen's living room curtains were drawn tight, but the window near her side garden was cracked open to let in the cool air. I crouched behind a row of overgrown hydrangeas, ironically the kind of unruly vegetation she would have fined me for, and listened. The air inside was thick with a different kind of energy. No talk of property values. No mention of trip hazards. "We are the front line," Karen's voice rang out, stripped of its sugary suburban lilt. It was hard, cold, and vibrating with a strange, frantic fervor. For too long, Willow Creek has allowed the darkness to take root. We call it fun. We call it tradition. But we know what it truly is, an invitation to the adversary. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the night air. "The Nixon boy," a man's voice murmured. "The one in the chair. He's the spearhead. His father uses him as a shield to keep the pagan imagery alive." "David Nixon is a vessel for the old ways," Karen snapped. I could hear the pacing of her footsteps on the hardwood. "He thinks he's building a toy. He's building an idol. By banning the holiday, we aren't just cleaning up the streets, we're cleansing the spirit of this land. We are closing the gates to the great deceiver." There was a chorus of "Amen" and "Praise be." I gripped my phone, the record button already glowing red. This wasn't a policy dispute. This wasn't about weathered oak stain or trip hazards. Karen was a religious extremist who viewed a 10-year-old in a cardboard Batmobile as a demonic threat. "The harvest brunch will be our victory," Karen continued, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Once we have the curfew in place, the streets will be silent. The darkness will find no home here. And if Nixon continues to resist, well, we've already seen how easily the community turns on a neglectful parent." I held my breath as a shadow crossed the window. She was right there, inches away. "The Lord works in mysterious ways," she whispered. "But sometimes he needs a little help from the board of directors." I retreated slowly, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I made it back to my porch, my hands shaking as I saved the audio file. I looked up at Toby's bedroom window. My son didn't see pagan idols. He saw a chance to be fast. He saw a chance to be brave. To Karen, his joy was a sin. To her, his disability was a tool she could use to make me look like a failing, neglectful father who couldn't keep his house in order. She wasn't just trying to win an election. She was trying to perform an exorcism on our neighborhood. I walked inside and looked at the Batmobile in progress. The silver paint was drying on the wings. I picked up a brush and added another coat. Karen thought she was fighting the devil, but she was about to find out that there's nothing more dangerous than a father with nothing left to lose. The Quiet and Safe Autumn Initiative wasn't just a policy. It was a shakedown. By the third week of October, my inbox looked like a crime blotter, and my bank account was bleeding out from 1,000 paper cuts. I sat at the kitchen table, a stack of certified letters spread out like a losing hand of poker. Toby was in the living room, trying to practice his Batman growl while he colored a bat symbol. But even he could feel the tension. He kept glancing at me, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. "Another one, Dad?" he asked, pointing to the thick envelope I'd just opened. "Just boring grown-up mail, Tobes," I said, forcing a lightness I didn't feel. "Go see if you can find that roll of black duct tape for the wheel wells." As soon as he wheeled into the hallway, I dropped the mask. Citation number 402, non-conforming seasonal floor covering. The welcome mat had a small orange leaf on it. Fine, $75. Citation number 405, unauthorized auditory disturbance. Toby's wheelchair lift had squeaked during a 7:30 a.m. departure. Fine, $100. Citation number 409, cumulative aesthetic negligence. Fine, $250. Karen was smart. She wasn't just hitting me with big, contestable fines. She was nickel and diming me into submission. She knew that as a single father with a kid who had high medical expenses, I couldn't afford a lawyer to fight every $75 charge. She was trying to drain the Batmobile fund until I was too broke to even buy the candy. The doorbell rang, a sharp, aggressive chime that I'd come to associate with Karen's compliance patrol. But when I opened the door, it wasn't Karen. It was a courier. "Sign here, Mr. Nixon," the man said, handing me a digital pad. "Official board correspondence. Urgent." I ripped the envelope open. My heart stopped. "Notice of intent to lien," it read in bold, soulless font. "Due to outstanding unpaid fines exceeding $1,600, the Willow Creek HOA hereby gives notice of its intent to place a lien against the property at 124 Oak Court. Failure to remit payment within 72 hours will result in further legal action, including potential foreclosure proceedings." $1,500? I'd been paying what I could, but she'd added administrative processing fees and late penalties that doubled the original amounts. She was going for the house. She was trying to take the roof over Toby's head because I wouldn't take the orange lights off the garage. I looked out the window. Across the street, Karen was gardening, which mostly consisted of her standing near her mailbox and watching my reaction. She didn't look like a religious zealot or a local tyrant. She looked like a nice lady in a sensible sun hat. But when she saw me holding the letter, she didn't look away. She gave me a small, polite nod, the kind you'd give a stranger at a funeral. She was waiting for me to break. She wanted me to come crawling over, apologize for the pagan decorations, and beg for a payment plan. Instead, I went to the garage. I grabbed a gallon of the brightest, most non-conforming purple paint I could find, the exact color Toby wanted for the Batmobile's underglow. I didn't paint the car. I walked to the end of my driveway, right where the property line met the HOA-controlled sidewalk, and I painted a thick, defiant purple line. If she wanted a war of aesthetic harmony, I was going to give her a masterpiece of discord. I went back inside and dialed a number I'd been hesitant to call. "Hey, Mike, it's David. You still have those ghoulish wreaths the board told you to burn?" "Yeah. Bring them over. We're having a meeting. And tell the Millers to bring their illegal fog machine." Karen thought she could isolate me by making me a liability. She forgot that in a neighborhood full of parents, there's nothing more dangerous than threatening a child's home. The fines were piling up, but for the first time in weeks, I wasn't counting the cost. I was counting my allies. The underground didn't meet in a dimly lit bunker. We met in my basement, surrounded by half-finished cardboard tail fins, smelling of spray adhesive and cheap pizza. I looked around the room. There was Mike Miller, still clutching a violation notice for his overgrown oak tree. Sarah from 3 doors down, whose non-conforming wind chimes had been confiscated by Karen personally. And even Mr. Gable, the oldest resident on the block, who was fuming because Karen had told him his porch swing was a structural liability. "She's out of control, Dave," Mike said, tossing a crumpled orange slip onto my workbench. "She fined me $50 because my lawnmower was too loud on a Saturday afternoon. It's a lawnmower. It's supposed to make noise." "It's not about the noise, Mike," I said, leaning against the Batmobile's chassis. "And it's not about my ramp or Sarah's wind chimes. I have something you need to hear." I pulled out my phone and played the recording from the prayer circle. The room went dead silent as Karen's voice filled the basement, hard, cold, and dripping with that zealot's edge. Cleansing this den of iniquity, the Nixon boy, a vessel for the old ways. When the recording ended, Sarah gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. She thinks our kids are part of a cult? Because they want fun-sized Snickers? "She's not just a stickler for the rules," I said, my voice steady. "She's a fanatic. She's using the HOA bylaws as a holy war, and she's targeting me and Toby because we're the easiest to make look unfit or neglectful to the rest of the neighborhood. She's trying to put a lien on his house for God's sake," I added, the anger finally bubbling over. Mr. Gable stood up, his joints popping. He'd lived in Willow Creek since the first brick was laid. "Henderson wouldn't have stood for this. That woman is a cancer on this street. What's the plan, David? We can't just ignore the fines. She'll take our homes." "We don't ignore them," I said, a slow smile spreading across my face. "We overwhelm her. Karen wants order and decency. She wants a quiet, sterile October where everyone stays inside and eats organic apple slices at her harvest brunch. So we're going to give her exactly what she asked for until the 31st. I laid out the plan. It was risky, and it would require every one of them to play their part perfectly. We weren't going to fight her in the streets, not yet. We were going to follow every single one of her beautification standards to a ridiculous, literal extreme. If she wants aesthetic uniformity, we give it to her, I explained. But we do it in a way that makes her life a living hell. And on Halloween night, we don't hide. We don't stay in for the curfew. "What about the paving project?" Sarah asked, referring to the rumor that Karen was trying to block the streets. "Let her try," I said, looking over at Toby, who was watching us from the doorway, his eyes wide with wonder. "She thinks she's fighting a demon. She has no idea she's actually fighting a neighborhood that's finally had enough." As they left, one by one, slipping out through the back garden to avoid Karen's compliance patrol, I felt a weight lift. For weeks, it had been just me and Toby against the world. Now, The world was starting to push back. But as I locked the door, I saw a familiar beige SUV idling at the end of the cul-de-sac. The headlights flickered twice. A warning. Karen knew something was happening. She was watching the shadows, and I knew her next move would be her biggest one yet. The malicious compliance phase began on Monday. Following my lead, the Willow Creek Underground turned the neighborhood into a sterile, surrealist nightmare. Mike Miller mowed his lawn 3 times a day until it looked like a pudding green. Sarah took down her wind chimes and replaced them with approved aesthetic gray stone statues of weeping angels. We were so quiet, so decent, and so perfectly in line with the bylaws that Karen had nothing to photograph. For 3 days, the silence in the cul-de-sac was deafening. I saw her pacing her porch, clipboard in hand, looking like a predator that had lost the scent. She knew we were up to something, but since we were following every ridiculous rule to the letter, she couldn't strike. Until Thursday morning. I was loading Toby into the van for school when a fleet of heavy industrial trucks, painted a dull corporate orange, roared into the neighborhood. They weren't city vehicles. They were private contractors. Within minutes, they began unloading rolls of heavy-duty black plastic and massive piles of steaming, foul-smelling asphalt at the entrance of our street. "Dad, why are those big trucks blocking the way?" Toby asked, his voice small. I looked at the lead truck. Taped to the driver's side door was an official HOA notice, Emergency Infrastructure Improvement Project. I left the van idling and marched over to the foreman. "What's going on? This street was paved 2 years ago." The foreman, a guy who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else, handed me a work order. "Ask your president, pal. We're doing a full resurfacing of the cul-de-sac and the main artery, starting October 31st at 8 a.m. No vehicles in or out until the sealant cures. Estimated completion, November 1st, noon." October 31st? I felt the blood drain from my face. That's Halloween. You're literally paving the street on Halloween night? "Doctor's orders," the foreman said, pointing toward Karen's house. She was standing on her driveway, wearing a hard hat and a high-visibility vest that looked brand new. She waved at me, a slow, mocking movement of her hand. I didn't wait. I stormed over, my boots crunching on the gravel. "A paving project, Karen? Really? You're going to trap everyone in their driveways for 24 hours? What if there's an emergency? What if Toby needs his meds?" Karen didn't even flinch. She checked a silver stopwatch hanging around her neck. "Oh, David, always so dramatic. We've arranged for emergency golf carts to be stationed at the gate for essential travel. But as for the festivities? Well, the chemicals in the sealant are quite toxic. It wouldn't be safe for children to be out collecting things in that environment. Liability, you know?" "You're a liar," I said, my voice low and dangerous. "You're doing this to kill the holiday. You're spending thousands of dollars of our dues just to keep kids off the street." "I am improving the infrastructure of our community," she said, her eyes flashing with a terrifying, holy light. "I am ensuring that this October 31st is the quietest, cleanest, and most sanctified night this neighborhood has ever seen. No monsters on my watch, David. No idols on wheels." She stepped closer, her voice dropping so the foreman couldn't hear. "I have the board's approval. I have the contract signed. And if you try to interfere with the critical infrastructure project, I'll have the police here in 5 minutes to escort you and your vessel out of the neighborhood for good." I looked back at Toby. He was watching us through the van window, his Batmobile wings peeking out from the cardboard box in the trunk. He didn't know yet. He didn't know that the road to his superhero dreams was literally being paved over with Karen's spite. "You think you've won?" I said, turning back to her. "I know I've won," Karen whispered, her smile widening into something truly ghoulish. "Go home, David. The harvest brunch starts at 10 on Sunday. I've saved an apple for the boy." I walked back to the van, my mind racing. She had used the infrastructure loophole, the only thing in the bylaws that allowed the president to bypass a community vote in the name of safety. She had trapped us. But as I pulled out of the driveway, I looked at the hidden camera I'd installed in my mailbox, the one that had caught her dumping the pumpkins. I realized something. Karen was so focused on the road, she'd forgotten about the sidewalk. And she'd definitely forgotten that I still had the video of her midnight gardening. The smell of hot asphalt already haunted my dreams, but the reality was worse. Giant yellow drums of sealant sat like sentinels at the end of every driveway. Karen had effectively turned Willow Creek into a high-security prison, all under the guise of essential maintenance. Toby was quiet that evening. He sat in his chair, staring at the half-finished Batmobile. The silver paint on the thrusters looked dull in the dim garage light. "Dad," he said softly, "if the road is sticky, how will the Batmobile roll? Will the tires get stuck?" "We're working on a secret plan, Toby," I said, my heart breaking for him. Batman always has a gadget for a sticky situation. But I was out of gadgets. I was out of time. I retreated to my office and pulled up the storage drive for the mailbox camera. I'd been so busy fighting the fines and the paving crews that I hadn't checked the 2 a.m. to 4 a.m. window from the night before. I scrolled through hours of empty, moonlit street. Then, at 2:14 a.m., a flash of beige. Karen's SUV crept into frame. She didn't have her headlights on. She pulled up to my curb, but she didn't get out right away. She sat there for 5 minutes, the glow of her phone illuminating her face. She looked manic. Her hair was uncharacteristically messy, and she was talking to herself. When she finally stepped out, she wasn't carrying pumpkins. She was carrying a heavy industrial sprayer, the kind used for pesticides. I watched, mesmerized by the sheer lunacy of it. As the president of the Willow Creek HOA proceeded to spray a dark, oily liquid all over my prize-winning rose bushes, the ones Mr. Henderson had given me before he died. Then she moved to the ramp. She soaked the wood of Toby's wheelchair ramp in the same foul-smelling gunk. She wasn't just framing me anymore. She was destroying my property to create a safety violation she could cite the next morning. But then she did something even better. She tripped. As she turned to jog back to her car, her foot caught on the edge of the curb. The sprayer flew out of her hand, splashing her pristine white tracksuit with the oily black liquid. She let out a scream, thin and jagged, that the microphone caught perfectly. She scrambled to her feet, cursing in a way that would have made a sailor blush. And then she did something that made my jaw drop. She looked directly at my mailbox. She narrowed her eyes, realized there was a lens tucked into the decorative ironwork, and she lunged for it. The screen went black as her hand covered the camera, but the audio kept running. "You think you're so smart, Nixon?" Her voice hissed, inches from the mic. "You and your broken little boy. This neighborhood is a temple, and I am the gatekeeper. By the time I'm done, there won't be a scrap of your pagan filth left on this street. I'll burn this house down with compliance before I let you ruin my kingdom." The audio cut out with a sharp crack as she ripped the camera from its housing. I sat in the dark, the blue light of the monitor reflecting in my eyes. I didn't feel angry anymore. I felt a cold, sharp clarity. She hadn't just admitted to vandalism. She'd admitted to a personal vendetta against a child with a disability. She'd called Toby broken. I picked up my phone and opened the group chat for the Willow Creek Underground. "Everyone?" I typed, my fingers flying across the screen. "Meeting in my basement in 10 minutes. Bring your laptops and your phones. We aren't just celebrating Halloween this year." I looked at the black screen of the video player. "We're hosting an impeachment." The masterstroke Karen had planned for the 31st was a paving project. Mine was going to be a premiere. The community clubhouse smelled of stale coffee and Karen's expensive lavender perfume. She sat at the long mahogany table, flanked by Mel and Chris, who both looked like they'd been sucked dry of their own wills. Karen was wearing a crisp, high-collared white blouse, no sign of the oil-stained tracksuit from my video, and her hair was pulled back into a bun so tight it seemed to lift her eyebrows. "This emergency session of the Willow Creek HOA is called to order," Karen announced, her voice echoing off the vaulted ceiling. "The agenda is simple: the finalization of the autumn safety curfew and the formalization of the lien against 124 Oak Court for chronic noncompliance." The room was packed. Neighbors were standing along the walls, some holding their kids, others clutching the harvest brunch flyers Karen had jammed into their mailboxes. I sat in the front row, Toby's wheelchair locked beside me. He was wearing his Batman hoodie, the hood pulled up, watching Karen with a quiet, focused intensity. "Before we vote," I said, standing up. My voice was calm, which I could tell annoyed her. "I'd like to present a rebuttal to the safety concerns regarding my property." Karen rolled her eyes, a theatrical sigh escaping her lips. "David, we've been over this. The rotting pumpkins, the chemical spills on your ramp, the unauthorized hobbyist construction. It's a matter of public record now. Is it? I walked to the front of the room, carrying a small flash drive. Because I have some public record of my own. From the night you claimed my ramp became a biohazard. Karen's hand froze over her gavel. For a split second, the mask slipped, and I saw a flicker of genuine, predatory fear in her eyes. This is a board meeting, not a film festival, Mr. Nixon. Sit down. Actually, the bylaws state that a member facing a lien has the right to present evidence, Mel muttered, surprisingly finding a backbone. He looked at me and nodded. Plug it in, David. I didn't say a word as the projector hummed to life. The first image was the high-definition footage of Karen's beige SUV backing into my driveway at 3 a.m. A gasp rippled through the room. Then came the video of her unloading the rotting pumpkins, the one she'd accused me of neglecting. This is a deep fake, Karen shrieked, standing up so fast her chair toppled over. He's a tech head. He's manipulated the footage. Wait for the best part, I said. The video shifted to the night of the chemical spill. The room watched in stunned silence as Karen, the paragon of decency, sprayed my dead friend's roses with herbicide and soaked Toby's ramp in oil. When she tripped and the audio kicked in, her voice calling Toby broken and the neighborhood a temple, the silence in the room turned into a low, vibrating growl of collective fury. I'll burn this house down with compliance before I let you ruin my kingdom. Karen's voice boomed through the speakers. I paused the video on a freeze frame of her face, manic, distorted, and leaning into the camera. Karen, I said, turning to face her. She was trembling, her face a sickly shade of gray. You didn't just break the law. You broke the trust of every person in this room. You used our dues to pave a street that didn't need it, just to trap a kid in his house on the one night he feels like a hero. I was saving you, she screamed, her voice cracking. I was saving your souls from the darkness. You're all blind. You're letting the devil in through the front gate. She looked around the room, searching for an ally, but all she saw were parents who had been fined for wind chimes and wreaths, and neighbors who had lived next to Mr. Henderson for 20 years. I move for an immediate vote of no confidence, Mike Miller shouted from the back, and a referral to the police for vandalism and harassment. Seconded. 20 voices roared at once. Mel and Chris didn't even look at her. They both raised their hands. The motion carries, Mel said, his voice finally firm. Karen, you are removed as president, effective immediately. And as for the paving project, I think we can find a way to postpone the sealant until November 2nd. Karen didn't say a word. She grabbed her designer bag and fled out the side door, the sound of her heels clicking frantically against the floor until the heavy doors swung shut. Toby looked up at me, his Batman mask pulled down over his eyes. Does this mean the Batmobile is sanctioned now, Dad? I laughed, a real deep laugh for the first time in months. Tobes, the Batmobile is the guest of honor. The 31st of October arrived with a sky the color of a bruised plum and a wind that smelled of wood smoke and victory. The emergency paving project had vanished as quickly as Karen's authority. The orange drums were gone, replaced by something far more appropriate. Giant, grinning jack-o'-lanterns that seemed to wink at everyone passing by. I stood in the driveway, putting the final touches on Toby's masterpiece. The Batmobile was a marvel of cardboard and backyard engineering. I'd rigged the wheelchair with a small smoke machine tucked under the exhaust and a soundboard that played a low, menacing engine thrum at the press of a button. Every time I hit the switch, the chassis vibrated just enough to make Toby giggle. Ready, Batman? I asked, checking the tension on his graphite gray cape. It was made from an old high thread count sheet I'd dyed midnight black, weighted at the corners so it would flare out perfectly when he moved. Toby didn't just nod. He sat taller. Behind his mask, his eyes were bright, with a fierce, joyful light, the kind of light Karen had tried so hard to extinguish. The city is safe now, Dad. Let's go. As we rolled out of the driveway, the Willow Creek Underground emerged from their homes like a choreographed uprising. It wasn't just a holiday. It was a reclamation of the streets. Mike Miller had gone all out, turning his front yard into a full-scale graveyard with fog so thick you could barely see the sidewalk. He'd even rigged a motion-activated skeleton to jump out from behind his approved aesthetic hedge, a direct middle finger to the old regime. Sarah from 3 doors down was handing out full-sized candy bars, her non-conforming wind chimes ringing out a celebratory, metallic tune in the breeze. Everywhere I looked, the rules were being broken with artistic flair. There were purple lights, orange inflatables, and a mechanical spider the size of a Volkswagen. The street was alive. Kids in neon costumes swarmed the cul-de-sac, their laughter echoing off the houses that had been silent and sterile just a week ago. As we reached the center of the block, I saw a familiar beige SUV parked at the very edge of the neighborhood, just outside the security gate. Karen was sitting behind the wheel, her face a pale, ghostly mask of resentment behind the glass. She was watching us, watching the pagan filth take over her kingdom. She looked smaller than she had in the clubhouse, stripped of her clipboard and her power. For a second, our eyes met. I didn't feel the need to shout or gloat. I didn't even need to show her the video again. I just reached over, tapped the button on Toby's armrest, and a blast of theatrical fog billowed out from behind his wheels, momentarily obscuring her view with a thick white cloud. When the smoke cleared, we were already moving toward the next house, and the gatekeeper was nothing more than a bitter memory in a rearview mirror. "Look, Dad, Mr. Henderson's house," Toby called out, pointing a gloved finger. The new owners, a young couple who had been terrified of Karen's emails for months, had kept the Henderson tradition alive. They draped a massive pirate sail over the porch and were handing out gold chocolate coins from a treasure chest. As Toby rolled up the driveway, a ramp that was now officially aesthetic and approved by the interim board, the entire neighborhood seemed to pause. "Make way for the Batmobile!" Mike Miller shouted, raising a plastic pirate sword to the sky. The kids cheered. The parents clapped. Toby did a slow, triumphant 360-degree spin in his chair, his purple LED underglow painting the pavement in defiance of every weathered oak regulation Karen had ever written. He was the hero Willow Creek needed, and for the first time, everyone saw him exactly as he saw himself. I stood back, watching my son lead the parade of monsters and heroes down the street. The fines didn't matter. The legal threats were being handled by a pro bono lawyer Sarah had found through her office. The lien was a dead letter, shredded in the first meeting of the new, temporary board. As the sun dipped below the horizon and the orange glow of the streetlights took over, I realized that Karen had been right about one thing. Willow Creek was a temple, but it wasn't a temple to her narrow, cold version of order. It was a temple to the things that actually matter. The sound of a kid's laughter, the smell of a pumpkin on a crisp night, and the stubborn, unbreakable strength of a community that looks out for its own. "Best Halloween ever, Dad," Toby whispered as we finally headed back toward our house, his bag heavy enough to require a structural support upgrade for next year. "The best ever, Tobes," I agreed, looking at the purple line I'd painted on the driveway. I wasn't going to scrub it off. I was going to seal it. It was a reminder that some things are worth fighting for, especially when they're made of cardboard, duct tape, and dreams. The monsters were back in Willow Creek, and for the first time in a long time, everything was exactly as it should be. And that's David and Toby's story. And if you made it this far, I'd appreciate you dropping a like, and maybe throw in a comment to let me know what other HOA stories you'd like to hear. Hope that you have a great rest of your day, and I'll catch you all next time.